Anyone who's been paying attention knows that there is a controversy that's been going on for a long time. A bit of an argument, you might say, between people who believe that evolution is non-existent, couldn't possibly happen, there is no such thing, and of course people who believe that evolution is not only real, but very important to understand. So, here's a question. What if those who think that evolution does not exist could actually understand it? Might they change their mind about whether or not it exists? Okay, you might be one of those who thinks, well, I understand evolution, and it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I've met a lot of people in that position. Now, I don't know about your particular belief. I'm not sure. Depending who's watching this, maybe I do know, but I don't know who's watching it. I mean, right now nobody is because I'm recording it. But consider this. A lot of people have the position that there's no such thing as evolution because their idea of evolution is something to the effect of a frog peed on a rock and a monkey popped out, or two monkeys got together and made a human. This is not evolution. These are mythologies. Specifically, they're mythologies invented as a straw man argument to try to make evolution look like something that isn't real. And they do a good job of it when they can convince people that that's what evolution is, but it's not. So I'm going to start with something really simple. I'm going to use a program. It's a simulation called GenePool, and I'm going to use it to demonstrate some of the basic principles of evolution. So let me start by showing you what GenePool looks like. Well, that's just a glimpse at what the program looks like, and I also have it sped up, so it looks a little choppy. The reason I've sped it up is because, well, I don't want this video to get too boring with too much time being taken up. So I set the frame rate of the recording so that it plays back at I think about 4 times normal speed. I'm not even sure exactly where I put it, but it's faster than normal. So it looks a little choppy, runs a little fast, but I'm going to try to use this program to demonstrate what evolution is. Now, keep in mind that evolution is a process. That process can happen in a lot of different ways. Just like walking isn't the same for dogs as it is for humans, evolution isn't the same for all things either. Now, this particular program is a simulation. It's not biological life. It's not intended to emulate biological life. It's intended as a simulation with some of the features of biological life. So I'm going to explain a few things in this simulation. First off, one of the reasons why I think this should be good for people who are otherwise afraid to learn about evolution is that most of the people who are afraid to learn about evolution seem to be under the impression that it conflicts with the Bible. Well, this particular demonstration doesn't. As far as I know, regardless of how you interpret the Bible, this doesn't conflict with it. So you shouldn't have a problem there. If you believe, for example, that everything reproduces after its own kind, and that kind was originally what was produced as the first of something, and that it never evolves into anything other than that kind, and one kind can't reproduce with another kind, then you'll be okay with this program because it only has 2 kinds. and they can't reproduce with each other. Let me show you what the first kind is. That kind of life form is called a food bit. You can probably guess by its name what purpose it serves in the program. You may have noticed where I put a few of them in a row up in the upper left corner, or roughly the upper left corner, and I bumped them into each other as I was doing that. Not much of a demonstration, since you're used to, of course, things in nature which don't just bump into each other and reproduce. But you will find that the other kind in this program can. So that was why I bumped these food bits into each other, to show that they don't reproduce just by bumping into each other. As a matter of fact, they're technically asexual reproducers. They reproduce without any need for each other at all. On the other hand, the other kind in this program is called a swimbot. Now, swimbots are segmented creatures, and they do need each other in order to reproduce. They do not have distinct sexual genders, such as male or female. Each one is capable of impregnating any other swimbot, and it doesn't matter even whether the other swimbot looks or acts anything like it. So they really are all the same kind in that sense. Now, I may use the word kind in this series of videos in a more common sense, to say, well, this kind of swimbot does this and that kind of swimbot does that. But keep in mind that they are all capable of reproducing with each other. If they're drastically different from each other, and both types of swimbots, both forms, are very capable of getting around and finding food and reproducing, and they mate with each other with their very different forms and produce an offspring that is a hybrid of the two, it's very likely that offspring is not going to do so well at getting around and finding food and a mate, for the simple matter of fact that its genes are being inherited from parents which were very adept at the form they had, not the new form of their offspring. So, let me show you what swimbots look like, and I'm going to just produce a few random swimbots to show you what they look like, and I will then clone some of these random swimbots and show you what happens when I allow a clone to mate with another clone. In other words, a swimbot to mate with another like swimbot. And you'll be able to see that the forms are usually exactly the same. There is the potential for the occasional mutation, and I'll explain that later. So there you have it, swimbots reproducing. Again, if the swimbots look alike, their offspring will look alike as well. Again, unless there is a mutation, which the mutations do occasionally happen, they're usually not very noticeable, not real obvious mutations. Some of the mutations are more obvious, and there again, if a mutation is obvious, if it's not just, say, for example, a color change, if it's maybe a limb is missing or whatever, it's usually not going to be to the advantage of that offspring. And things like that help to demonstrate some of how Charles Darwin's predictions about evolution by natural selection help scientists to understand, for example, the evolution of bacteria and viral life forms, and use such understanding to help prevent and cure diseases. Now, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate also what it looks like when two swimbots mate that don't have the same form. And this is just to give you an idea how drastically different the offspring can look from either parent. But keep in mind, of course, that this is what happens when everything is the same kind, regardless of how different it is. This is actually why it is advantageous for speciation to occur in biology. Species, of course, would be the equivalent of the biblical idea of kind, where two animals of different species, or a plant from one genus and species and an animal from another genus and species, are generally unable to reproduce with each other. And when they do, very often the offspring is incapable of reproduction. Now, there are no exact cutoff lines in such things in biology. It's more a matter of what's more likely and what's less likely. In the case of this program, GenePool, all swimbots are, again, able to reproduce with all swimbots. So they are, in that sense, all the same species, all the same kind. As much as I'd like to see speciation support introduced into the program, it doesn't have it. So let me go ahead and demonstrate now how it looks when swimbots of different forms breed together. Okay, you might have noticed that at the end there, probably didn't leave it long enough for you to really see, but I left the swimbot right in the middle of the screen, which is very simple in form. Very likely a single segment, possibly one small segment and one very tiny segment. At any rate, it can't get around at all. You've probably noticed the other swimbots aren't real good at getting around. They're pretty inept. Now, this is the way a random swimbot would be expected to be. If you have a swimbot which has evolved or been carefully designed, then you might expect something different. I would highly recommend you get a hold of the program GenePool yourself and try engineering a swimbot. You actually can go in and engineer the genes of a swimbot and try to create your own healthy breed of swimbots that can get around and find food and mate and produce a nice sized colony without just dying off when you stop giving it your careful attention. I think you'll find that allowing them to evolve naturally tends to work a whole lot better than actually trying to design them. But I'll let you make up your own mind on that. At any rate, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that single swimbot and I'm going to make a clone of it and then breed it with its clone. And I know incest is a little distasteful, but these are simple life forms and they're not real. They're not biological. They're computer simulations. So bear with me while I produce several generations of offspring from that one particular swimbot and see if I can attempt to get at least one noticeable mutation to show up. I may or may not be successful in this, but I'm going to give it a try. Well, as you can probably see, there were no noticeable mutations in all of that time. Now, that's not to say that none of the genes mutated, but keep in mind, this is a swimbot that appears to have only one segment. There could be mutations in genes that would affect other segments if they were there. This is the way this particular simulation works. However, you wouldn't see those changes if there's no segment to represent them. There are also mutations in behavior, in movement that could have taken place. Genes that control such things as how far or how fast two segments pivot on each other. Again, would not be noticeable in a one-segment swimbot. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these last two that I've produced, and I'm going to drag them to a part of the pool, a part of the pond, whatever you want to call it, where there's a lot of food available. And I'm going to drop them on top of each other and just let nature take its course. We'll see if we can spot any noticeable mutations in the resulting offspring or descendants over time. Well, as you can see, it actually did produce a noticeable mutation. Um, Now you might think, oh, that's not one mutation. Um, it's got a whole bunch of limbs, and the other ones have none at all. But as I was saying before, there are genes which control the other limbs, which don't show up if there's no gene to produce the other limbs, the other segments. So basically, um, a change of one gene can result in a bunch of limbs or a bunch of segments. It won't always do that. In this case, we got lucky and we went from a swimbot that can't get around to one that can get around. Now, it's trying really hard to reach one of the other swimbots to mate with it. And as a matter of fact, while I'm recording this segment right now, I'm actually watching the screen while it's kind of going in circles around them, so to speak, attempting to get closer to them, and it's just not succeeding. Now, again, if this was in the wild, if this was in nature, if this was on a whole planet, there may be other things that it could encounter by accident along the way. In this case, I've got this thing in an isolated spot where its own ancestors are the only thing around it that it could possibly find a mate with, and it's not very adept at swimming. So, and of course, what can we expect from one mutation? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and clone that particular swimbot and allow it a chance to mate with its clone. Now, I'm going to leave it alone. It may or may not be able to actually find its clone after I do that, but we'll take a look and see what happens. You might have noticed shortly after I cloned that swimbot that there was a mutation which swam off the bottom of the screen. Not a particularly advantageous mutation, but noticeable if you were paying attention. Shortly after that, there was a pair of swimbots, very, very similar to the original, which proceeded to begin encircling the entire group counterclockwise, in much the same way that the original had been encircling its helpless, limbless ancestors. Interestingly enough, though, if you watch them, they encircled a much larger group with a much larger arc or circle. So there was definitely some slight difference in their behavior. Again, probably some sort of mutation. You also may have noticed a few color mutations. Those really tend to stand out. In this case, a bunch of green swimbots and the occasional fleck of orange or purple in amongst the group really tends to show up. So I'm going to start the recording back up and let it continue recording, and we'll just see what happens after a while. Now, I don't know how long I'm going to leave this record, and I don't know exactly how these things are going to evolve, but what I can say is we should start to see a little scarcity of food and probably some resulting deaths. The swimbots will tend to turn dark before they die. No, not all dark swimbots are dying swimbots. Not all light swimbots are young swimbots either, but they are born white in a little round white egg, and when they run out of energy, they do tend to turn dark. And so watch for that, and also watch to see if you can spot any swimbots actually figuring out how to go directly to what they're trying to get to instead of going around it, because there probably already have been some mutations in behavior which have modified the way they go about trying to get to things. You might have noticed a few stragglers outside of the group already. Now it's running in the background while I'm filming this, so I'm going to go ahead and stop filming this and go back to filming GenePool and add the results when I get that ready. You may have noticed near the end of that filming, I was pointing toward some swim bots in the upper right hand corner, near the upper right hand corner. I believe that was the old limbless ancestors still in their little group there. Definitely looked like them. And that may seem a little strange with all the swim bots dying around them. Why are they still there? Well, I wanted to stop and point that out. The reason is because having no limbs, they're not expending any energy trying to get around. So while the other swim bots are using up their energy and dying from lack of food, these single cell ancestor swim bots are very efficiently just sitting there waiting for something to come along and mate with them. Now, they won't get fed that way. Nobody brings them food. It's not the way the program was written. But they can still produce offspring. And this does have a tendency to slow down the evolutionary process in this particular simulation at times because a lot of times mating with the ancestors will regress the process of evolution backward a few steps. But you may notice it continues to progress in spite of such things. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look for a swim bot that I evolved earlier today in a separate run of the program, and I'm going to add in a couple of copies of that swim bot, which actually had evolved to swim quite efficiently, just to show the difference between a swim bot that has had plenty of time to evolve and these which have evolved for a very short time. Now, I don't know if they will take over the population, if they'll interbreed with the population, if they will just get wiped out. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to turn out, but at least during the time that they're there, whether they last a long time or not, you should be able to see a difference in how they approach getting food and reaching a mate, and how efficient they are about it in terms of how directly they move towards something, how well they swim, etc. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Well, it appears that they took over. Not surprising when you think about the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, there are really only two kinds of life in GenePool, in at least up to version 6. I'm hoping that someday its creator, Jeffrey Ventrella, will decide to add some sort of speciation, or maybe an option of one of various kinds of speciation. Don't know if he'll do it. Busy guy, but it would be nice to see. Nonetheless, it is interesting though to notice how this works out without speciation, because what's happening is that the more able swimbots are basically breeding the other ones out of existence. They're so good at finding food and mates that they actually are using the remaining energy in the older population to help them produce offspring, which then, of course, the offspring carry partly their genes and partly the genes of the older population. Over time, the older population's genes are diluted to the point where it's nearly all genes from the new introduced population, which as I mentioned, had given a lot more time to evolve earlier. Now, on a planet like Earth, we have similar situations in breeds of a particular species where one breed may be particularly more adept than another, and perhaps evolved in a rougher environment and became a little stronger for it. And when they are brought back into a shared environment, the stronger breed may tend to dilute the genes of the weaker breed, or at least weaker under those circumstances or for that environment, until there's hardly any trace of it left. Now, it is interesting to note, of course, that since there is no speciation in this program, they're all just different breeds. There is no different species of swimbot. And if there had been, of course, then it begs the question of what would have happened to the old population as the food was eaten up by the new population. As you can see, when I brought up the population dialogue, the food particles are dwindling down very, very slim, down around 200 now, and it's even bringing down the population of the swimbots because they don't have enough left to eat. So, of course, if they had not been capable of breeding with each other, the new swimbots would have had to have found food and bred with each other in order to increase their numbers, and it would have been a lot harder for their numbers to increase quite so drastically, quite so quickly. And that may have given the other swimbots more time to adapt and possibly to find some sort of niche in the environment of their own. Of course, having their own genes diluted by the introduced swimbots reduces the chance of them even being able to develop any way of fitting into any kind of a niche, if a niche could be found. This is all part of how evolution works, but of course it's also very specifically part of how evolution works in this program, the way it's set up. So I'm going to go back to filming, and I'm not sure what's going to happen from here, if they're going to run completely out of food and run themselves extinct, or just what will happen. But as I mentioned, the food is getting scarce. That is a critical time in evolution whenever things get difficult and the number of available members of a species, in this case swimbots being the species, gets to dwindle down next to nothing, or near endangerment of extinction, this is when the oddballs have the most potential to end up overtaking the massive numbers, to overtake the majority. In other words, the minority becomes less of a minority as the numbers decrease. For example, if there is only one of one particular form, and there's 100 of some other form, that one is a very small minority. But as the numbers dwindle down, if there's still one of that original rarity, when there's only one left of the other, that one is now 50%. And its genes have a lot better chance of getting passed on. So again, I'm going to go ahead and record some more, and we'll see what happens. So I hope you can see from this video that evolution is simply the gradual changes in something that roll out over time. It has nothing to do with creation. It does result in the origin of new forms. For example, how you look in your old age, in a sense, originates from how your body evolves from its childhood into your adulthood. The changes roll out over time and you become what you become. Now, does this mean you'll no longer be human because you evolved into something else? No. Evolution doesn't work that way. You have a human body. Your body will remain human unless somebody messes with your DNA, in which case even then, your physical body is still going to be what it was before. But the changes in your DNA might cause some changes to happen over time. For example, depending on what they changed, they might be able to make it so you could grow an extra pair of limbs, like, say, wings. They might be able to make it so you could see another color that you can't see now. Little changes like that could be considered evolutionary changes. Of course, if we engineer such changes, they're not natural evolutionary changes in the sense of happening without our intervention. But the more we learn to understand evolution, the more it can benefit us. The same with anything else about our universe. The more we learn to understand it, the more benefit we can derive from it. So I hope that this video will help some people out there to get over their fear and start to learn about evolution, what it is, how it works, what it's not. Because it's certainly not something giving birth to something of another species. Yeah, that does actually occasionally happen. It's very rare, and it's by no means the basis of evolution. When something like that happens, it's usually something to the effect of there was a drastic mutation that somehow survived anyway and managed to reproduce once or twice before failing to be able to interbreed with any of its ancestors. Or when the number of chromosomes in a cell doubles, making it incompatible in some cases with the chromosomal arrangement of its ancestors. There are a lot of different ways that something can pretty much instantly speciate. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be instantly very different. It doesn't mean you're going to go from a dog to a cat, or from something that looks like a chimpanzee to something that looks like a human being. It simply means that within 1 or 2 generations, it is sometimes possible to end up with something that can't breed with what its ancestors were able to breed with and produce viable offspring that can also reproduce. However, speciation can happen without that sort of thing happening, and all indications that I know of are that it probably does that more often, that it probably more often, speciation probably more often happens through gradual changes, which eventually accumulate enough total changes that it's very difficult for the DNA of two entities with an ancient shared ancestor to be able to produce an offspring together, because their DNA simply can't combine well. There's too many differences in it. So I hope this helps. I'll I'll leave it record some more for the end of the video, and this is all I've got to say for this particular video. So if anybody wants to watch the rest, go ahead. I will include a link to where to find the GenePool program. It's simply swimbots.com. I'll include a link in the description for this video, and hopefully some people will go and download it and do their own experimentation. I will attempt to find time to make some more videos outlining a few other experiments and demonstrations to shed a little further light on what evolution is and how it really works. Again, this is not biological evolution in the sense that humans have evolved from something, but it is evolution of a form of reproduction nonetheless. And I'll try to go over some of the details of the differences in a future video. Thanks.